Hi guys, welcome back. Good morning. Just taking a few minutes here to get started, but we'll be ready to go in about 2 minutes. Good morning, guys. Hi, Jason, Janice, Sheely, Sergio, Angel, Mia, Sophia. Welcome back, guys. Cool. So just a few seconds to go. Welcome, welcome all. Good morning. So, Naaman, yeah, about your email. Let me ask you specifically, because I'm going to reply to you just now. I saw your message of yesterday. So after class, I'll get right to you. But in the first message that you tried to send me, Naaman, did you hit reply to my titanium announcement? And that's the reason that, that's how you tried to send me a message. Because if you ever hit reply to any titanium announcement, no, that's not a delivery system and it doesn't send it anywhere. So let me know, Naaman, how did you send that message? Hi, everybody. Hi, Brandon and Adrian, everyone else. Good owning. That's funny. Are you with me, Naaman? Let me know. Just while we're together right now, we can talk about that. Yes, so you can do that. Okay, just so we are all clear, never hit reply to those titanium announcements. That just sends it into nowhere. You have to compose an email like you did the second time. So now that I got your email, you're in the queue, but you were not placed in the queue originally because the first message never got to me. So just know that I don't want you to have any problems with that in the future. Because like say, when I send you the midterm form on Monday or Tuesday rather, if you hit reply to that with your midterm, you won't submit the midterm. You have to go into your email Outlook, click compose message, type my address in, rvillage@fullerton.edu, and then from there you hit send. But not to worry, Naaman and everybody else, if you've sent me a grade request, you're going to get that answer in short order. I'm just going through them in the order that I received them. I'm sending full scanned copies of each submitted essay with my comments written on them. And so just with the number of essays that I'm returning emails for and the scanning process, it just takes a little time. But not to worry, you're definitely getting your answer. And I'll be replying to all of you guys either today or latest tomorrow. Okay, so you have your grades ready for the first essay. They're already done. Now it's just a matter of sending back personalized replies to each student. But I'm making progress through it. Some of you that may have sent, so right now I'm current all the way up through people who emailed me as of like 11 a.m. on Tuesday. Brandon, you're the most recent one that got a reply. But there's a couple of those that are right on the bubble of the 48-hour, buffer that I give myself, and I'm going to get to you guys during my lunch and office hour time that I have scheduled later in this day. So anyways, you're going to get your essay grades back. But today we have an important meeting aside from that. The meeting today is all about the review session. So we all have this study guide that was distributed. And so I would just ask you guys to refer to your study guide, go back. If you don't have it pulled up right now, pull up a copy. Obviously you were mailed this study guide 6 days ago. So if you haven't looked, you certainly should pull it out from your titanium announcements, which I sent this one on the 12th. And let's just go over as many of these questions as you guys like. So I'll just explain the basic parameters of how I want and how I usually do review sessions. I like them to be mostly student-driven. So that means that I prefer it when the students take the initiative to try their best and give the information that would be the response. But I'm here to help assist. So I'm here to make sure that everything's correct and accurate, to expand on things where necessary, and to just direct you to the right information if it seems like you need a little push. But I'll take your questions then in whatever order. We're fielding questions from the study guide, so that's your resource to use. And that's it. I have nothing to teach. I'm here to help you review, so you'll guide me through and direct me to which questions. Okay, Angel. Answer number 4. Let me go up and look. Reductio ad absurdum. Okay, thank you, Angel. 3 positions on, okay, so we'll get to that also, Kobe. But about number 4, does anyone have knowledge or memory about what is reductio ad absurdum? The method of argument? Oh, it's okay, Angel, but let's just see if that's something that we know. Janice, you're not aware of it either? Does anybody have a faint recollection or memory? That's okay, Janice, we'll cover it. I'll make sure it's clear. Reductio ad absurdum. Can anybody help supply some info on this one? If not, I'll launch right into it, but just giving you a moment. It is to reduce to absurdity. That's right, Kobe. So can you tell me a little bit more about how one deploys this tactic? If you want to prove something through reductio, that's right, Kobe, use the opposite of it to prove that the object exists. Okay, that's a very brief statement of the idea, but in essence, you've got something correct, sort of. Yeah, so here's what it is. You assume the opposite of what you would like to prove, and then you show that if that was the case, that something impossible or absurd would be implied. And therefore, your original assumption is the case. So like, I want to prove, let's suppose, that, say that somebody says that I'm like a murderer, they're accusing me of murder, they think I'm the suspect. So they say, you are the person who broke into this liquor store on March 17th at 8 p.m., and we think that based on our surveillance footage, it's you. Okay, so that's their claim. They say I did it. Now I'm going to claim I'm innocent. So I want to prove that I'm innocent. If I'm going to use reductio, then what I would do for the first step is to temporarily assume for the sake of argument that I did do it. Okay, so my position is I didn't do it, but let's assume that I did, just for the sake of argument. Assuming this opposite thing, that I did it, then you'd have to show that that would imply something absurd. So you might show like receipts or something, placing you far away from the scene of the crime at the same time that it happened. Or you might show them like social media postings that you were doing at that time, where you're actually shown on video nowhere near the scene. So you're saying like, if I did it, then that means I must have not posted these videos, but I did, and therefore I didn't do it. Okay, so in that case, you see what I did there? I assumed something that's the opposite of my intended claim, but I just did that in order to show that it would lead to something absurd if you conjoin it to these other facts that we know. Another example, suppose that I'm a person who believes that the world is a sphere, and it is a sphere, it's not flat, but I'm dealing with a flat earther, and so they tell me, yo, it's flat. So I say, no, it isn't. Okay, and let me just do a reductio on you. I'm saying it's not flat, but assume that it is. Okay, guys, help me out for a moment. If I assume that the earth is flat, what absurd or ridiculous things would that imply? Suppose the earth was flat, just for the sake of discussion. If so, then what weird and ridiculous things would be a consequence of that? If that was so. We're just speculating on the possibility. If that were so, then can you tell me what kind of ridiculous stuff would come from that? Then people could fall off of the world. Then the whole planet would be a disk, so there should be light shining on all of it at the same time. If that's the case, then people that dig should be able to find themselves on the opposite side of the disk. You should also expect, if the Earth is flat, that all the photos that have ever been taken by global satellites and from space are just all faked and disseminated to the public to trick them. And all of this sounds absurd. So here, therefore, I can discharge that assumption, and that means that it's not flat. Okay, so that's how reductio ad absurdum works. Now, why did this get mentioned? Because way back in the beginning, I talked to you about it as we were learning from Anselm and the critics of Anselm. Anselm says that God is not something that's only in your head. He's not just only in your mind, but he's in the mind and in reality too. But he says, suppose that he was only in the mind, right? If he was, then he would not be the greatest conceivable being, but that's absurd because that's his definition. So therefore, he has to exist in the mind and in reality. And then like you have Gamillo who says, Anselm's argument doesn't work, but suppose that it did, then if it did, it would imply that this island thing exists, which is silly and ridiculous. So obviously his argument doesn't work. Okay, so that's how reductio ad absurdum works. You have a position, there's an opposite of your position. You assume that opposite just for a second, only to show that it would imply something absurd or impossible. That disqualifies the contrary of your view, and thus your view has to be the case. Okay, so that's reductio ad absurdum. So now, Kobe, I'm going back up a bit. You said 3 positions on the questions of God's existence. Well, what are those 3 positions? 3 viewpoints that people can and do have about whether God exists. What are those 3? Some people have this position, other people have this other position, and then there's even another position. So views, positions on the question of God's existence. Okay, so Celine, atheist, that's one. Theist, that's another. And there's also, what else? The agnostic, that's right. Theism, atheism, agnosticism. So you have those 3. What is a theist? Theism is the belief that God exists. And so a theist is a person who believes in the existence of God. What is atheism? Atheism is not having the belief in God. So disbelieving or lacking belief in God. What is agnosticism? This is kind of like a middle ground, neutral position between the other 2. It is neither affirming nor denying that God exists. It's withholding judgment, because the person that's an agnostic thinks that there's not enough evidence to make a conclusive case either way. So you have believers, non-believers, and basically those that say, I don't know either way, and I'm not going to choose. So these are 3 various positions on the question of whether God exists, and every single person is one of these 3 things. You either are a believer, or you're just not, or you have no view either way. Okay? And when people hold these different views, they're often defending them through rational argument, like theist arguments we studied. People trying to make the argument that there's a way to prove God exists. Atheists sometimes will make contrary arguments, like the problem of evil, for example, which tries to establish the non-existence of God. And I guess you have agnostics that could argue that there's no way of getting such evidence, and therefore we should stop trying to make proof or disproof. Now, Celine, 2 objections to Pascal's wager. Somebody tell me, what are 2 authors that we studied who could be given as objection to Pascal's wager? First of all, to answer the question about the objections, you would have to at least briefly mention and state what is the wager itself. So let's talk about that and review it if we can. Well, Angel, one thing at a time, Angel, but hold your thought. That's one possible objection, Angel, but it's not the only one. So you say the answer with a definite article, like there's one and only one. No, there's multiple objections. It's too demanding. There's also that no action is absolutely forbidden. But utility monster is a possibility as well. We'll talk about that. So let us return to my question. What is Pascal's wager? Oh, no, it's okay, Angel, but just so you know, there are a variety of possible objections that are separate from theory for swine. So I'm asking still, Pascal's wager. Makes more sense to believe in God than to not, because you have more to lose if you don't. Basically, yes, that's very brief, but overall he says no one could prove it either way, because God, if he does exist, he's beyond the power of the mind to know. But we know that he either does or doesn't. One of those 2 things must be true. So you're basically put in a position to bet on the question, wager, as he says, one way or the other, kind of like a coin flip, which has 2 sides, and you are put in a position to choose which one you think will come up. Now, with the wager of God's existence, he says wagering to believe is a way better and safer bet than wagering not to believe. Because with belief, what do you have to lose, pretty much, is the thought. You know, you have nothing to lose. Even if you're wrong, there's no cost to you, basically. But if you're right, you might get this awesome infinite reward of heaven. On the other hand, though, if you choose not to believe, you really have nothing to gain by that bet. Maybe if you're right, you know, nothing happens. And if you're wrong, then you could be punished, or at least denied the rewards of heaven by God if he exists. So with belief, if you win everything. And if you lose nothing. With disbelief, if you win nothing. And if you lose everything. So he says it's a clear winner. The bet to believe is a safer bet, because the risk-reward ratio is so much higher. Less risk, higher potential reward. Compared to the other bet, a lot of risk, no potential reward. So he says, why wouldn't a reasonable person just choose to believe as a way of making sure that they don't have those risks? Now, you say, Naaman, that there's Clifford and McKim. That's right. But let's spell it out a little bit. Clifford says that people should never believe what kind of things? W.K. Clifford, the example of a ship owner. Just give me one thing to say about that. What did he say involving the ship owner, and what is the moral of the story based on the ship owner? Just tell me that piece of info. Because this is what we're asking about right now, the objections to the wager. So I've already spoken about the wager, and so have you. Now let's move to those objections. What is Clifford's main point in his essay? Okay, name it. He's still at fault for sending the crew on a faulty boat, regardless of whether it would sink or not. Yeah. So, correct. The boat he knows is dangerously unsafe, but he hopes that it will work out anyway. So he just goes with his hope instead of the clear evidence that it's highly unsafe. Suppose it sinks, he's wrong. Suppose it doesn't sink, he's still wrong because he shouldn't put people at risk with the evidence that he had. So takeaway is it's wrong to believe things without sufficient evidence backing it up. It's wrong to believe things just because you would prefer or hope that they're true. So the only right reason to believe anything is because there's sufficient evidence to support that belief. And so that's the reason he says, it's, I think, what is it, page 51, it's wrong for anyone, everywhere, always to believe anything without sufficient evidence. Now, how could, and that he does display a credulous character, right, which he thinks is a bad thing. That's a person who believes stuff without good reason, and that's a harmful tendency to have in your own behavior and to spread to others. So why is that an objection to Pascal? Pascal said no one can prove whether God exists. There's no evidence. Sorry, but there's no evidence. And now believe anyway, though, because maybe you'll be right. Clifford says that's wrong. You shouldn't believe stuff just because you hope it's true. If there's evidence, fine. But if there's no evidence, like what Pascal admits, then it's wrong to believe. Okay, and so then you also had McKim. McKim said that God's hidden, right? So God cannot be perceived with the eyes or with any of the five senses. Of course, many people believe in him despite the fact that he's hidden, but he's hidden. So McKim says, he uses this long-winded example of like a hidden emperor sort of as a metaphor to explain his thinking here. But the ultimate conclusion he gets to is because God is hidden, maybe there's no God, or maybe there is, but since he chooses to remain hidden then, he might not even care whether we believe in him or not. Now, take that point. Suppose God didn't care whether we believed in him or not. How could that function as an objection to Pascal's wager? Can anyone tell me that? So how is McKim's observation that a hidden God might not care whether we believe? How is this relatable to the wager? Just putting those few pieces together, and then we're moving on from this wager question. We're just waiting for you to type it out. So I've explained a lot of that, but I want you to give me the last piece. If God doesn't care if we believe, then there won't be any repercussions for not believing, yes. So with McKim's postulation that God may not even take any interest in whether we believe, then in that case, there's no reason to suppose there's any stakes. No, Jerry, it's not that we shouldn't take a position. It's just that the position on either side doesn't have any risks or rewards. If God's up there not caring what you believe or what you're doing, then believing in him is not necessarily going to be rewarded, and disbelieving him is not necessarily going to be punished. So absent the assumption that God even cares whether you believe, there'd be no basis to assume that you're at risk by not believing or that you stand to gain if you do believe. And I think about that. I mean, God, if God exists, I would assume is going to judge you based on the moral record of your behavior. What if someone professes to believe in God, but they're out there killing people? But they say, but look, I'm righteous. I love God and God's everything to me. Is that person going to go to heaven just on the basis of they say they believe in God? Maybe they even do, but they're evil. So I would think that it's not just about belief. But anyway, Kobe, believing God only because it might benefit you is not actually real belief, and an omnipotent being knows the difference between a true believer or a skeptic. You could also make this point, right, that this is another possible objection. It's not necessarily in the literature that we studied, but yeah, people have said that God would not necessarily find favor with those who believe merely on the basis of crude self-interest. So that's a possibility as well. And I've also heard some say that it's impossible to choose what you believe. Like you can't just make yourself believe something through an act of will. Like right now, I want you to believe that there's like a goat right here. Just make it happen. Make you believe that. I mean, you can't believe it. Like, you can say I believe it, but in reality, you don't really think it's true. So it might be hard for some people to just be told, believe this because it's in your best interest if they don't have the evidence. So, okay, we've spoken on that. Let's go back up here and see what you wanted on the next type of topic or question. Or do I not see a new question? Oh, Celine. Well, sorry, you had a little asterisk with the number 1. Was that you saying you wanted to you wanted to modify your request from explaining 2 objections to just 1? Well, either way, we've covered more than 1, so that's fine. Now, Angel, I guess we can go over your question there about number 26. So, who could tell me what are some different objections to the utilitarianism theory? Those people that are utilitarians, they say that the right action is whichever action will generate the most overall happiness for the greatest number of people. Okay, so what's wrong with that? What could somebody say is wrong with that? And the question 26 says, other than the theory for swine, because that's dedicated to a different question. So not about theory for swine, but other objections against utilitarianism include what? I guess you mentioned one of them kind of there, Angel, the utility monster. We can cover that in a minute, but I was hoping someone else could point out the others that I was talking about briefly before. Other objections to utilitarian ethics. Like what? Okay, good, Neiman. No type of action is absolutely forbidden in principle. That's one of the big problems. According to utilitarianism, we're not able to say things like, it's always wrong to kill, it's always wrong to lie, it's always wrong to steal. Those things depend in utilitarianism on the consequences of the act. So if lying creates more utility or happiness than telling the truth, then that would be a situation where utilitarian ethics would say lying is moral. If stealing would create more happiness than not stealing something, then utilitarianism would say now it's good to steal. And even like the transplant scenario, where we imagine killing somebody, taking their organs out, giving them to a more numerous group of people and saving others with the organs, that of course would be fundamentally wrong, most of us think. But in utilitarian ethics, it's hard to say why it's wrong, because it's an act that prevents 5 deaths and causes 1. And if the act is not taken, 1 life is spared, but 5 end. So if you wanted to take the most happiness or create the most happiness, it would seem it would have to do with having more people alive. But of course, that involves an action that most would say is totally wrong. And then another one, good Kobe, that the theory is too demanding. Some say it is too demanding because the theory doesn't say, hey, promote the most happiness just for you and your friends and family or the people you really know. It says promote the most overall human happiness, period, regardless of whether these people are friends, strangers, or anything in between. So like if you can imagine a situation where you had a limited window of time to rescue people that were like in burning buildings. In one building, there's just 1 person, but it's a dear loved one. On the other hand, there's another building with a big group of 10, but they're just individuals who you don't know. It doesn't mean they're bad people or that you have any problem with them. I'm sure they're great people and there's a lot of family and friends that they have, but you don't know them and you don't have a relationship with them. So according to utilitarianism, even though you love the 1 person, you should attend to the needs of the bigger group because duty calls and there's more lives to be saved over there. But again, if this sounds to you like it's a bridge too far and it would go beyond what you could realistically be expected to do, because humans, we have attachments and we have bonds and we're partial to some people and familiar with some people, then that's another reason to maybe reject the argument. Would the transplant be utilitarian immoral if the majority or at least a lot of the population finds it wrong? Yeah, okay, Sebastian, fair point. A clever utilitarian is not just going to take that case sitting down and be like, yeah, our theory is out of control. They would say that if you really think about it hard, the net consequences of such an action happening would in the end be less optimistic than in a situation where we respect the rights of people. Because, for example, if it was discovered that this doctor or whoever was doing such things, then it would promote so much insecurity about personal safety and security throughout the rest of the community that would make people quite unhappy. So certainly, Sebastian, if we add context and we start to describe more real-world factors in such a scenario, then we can probably come up with an answer that a utilitarian would prefer as a way of justifying why it's really not okay, even to utilitarians. But it's often utilized anyway as a test case of utilitarian intuitions. Because in theory, you can always dream of a case in theory where the utilitarian says, here's an action that we say is right because of the circumstances, even though ordinarily it's wrong. But good point. Okay, so guys, too demanding, no action totally forbidden in principle. And yes, to Angel, sometimes people also refer to the utility monster objection. That's the idea that in utilitarianism, there's no concern with the equity of the distribution of utility, just the sum total aggregate. So if we can imagine a case where one person's interests dominate the situation because they're overwhelmingly strong, then they would always get their way, even if they're in the minority and everyone else prefers some alternative act. And that is perhaps another problem. Like it could, in theory, generate a justification for slavery because, you know, you can imagine that the people benefit so much from the slave labor that it overwhelms the pain that the slave suffers. And so on balance, there's more happiness through slavery than without it. But this is clearly something wrong. Okay. Both versions of the categorical imperative. Sure, Kobe. What are those? So Kant's categorical imperative, the philosophy of Kant's ethics. He says that his kind of master principle of ethics is this categorical imperative. He says we will use reason to reflect on the categorical imperative, and that will tell us what the moral law dictates that we can do or can't do. So he says this categorical imperative principle can be specified in two versions. What are those two versions? So help me out with that, and then I'll add more detail. One of the versions has to do with how we should or should not treat certain things, and the other one has to do with only acting according to certain types of principles. But I want you to maybe try and fish around and give me that information in this chat. So categorical imperative version 1, categorical imperative version 2. What are those? Okay, Naaman. You've written the form of a maxim, but it lacks a little context because you're not saying to what end a maxim must be acted on, right? So like it's only okay to act on what kind of maxims, if we can say this. The precise statement of the first version of the categorical imperative is like a rule. Act always such that what? And the second one, yeah, Angel, it does say, never treat a human being as a means to an end, always an end in itself. That's right. And so I'll add more depth to that, but that's the second version of the categorical imperative. We're still waiting on the first one, though. Naaman, you said something that's relevant to it, but it's not precisely worded. So what should a person do according to the first version of the categorical imperative? Act always so that the blank, that blank your action, could be willed to be a blank, okay? So there's technical stuff in there, you gotta say it. Sophia, act always so that the maxim which describes your action could be willed to be a universal law. Yes, correct. Now, let's put these pieces together. A maxim is a person's policy statement or principle of action when they do something. And it takes the form, I will do some action under certain given circumstances or conditions. So the form that it takes is what you wrote, Naaman, I will do some action X under circumstances C. So what Kant says in that first version is, when you're doing an action, identify what the maxim is of your action, and then consider what would it be if that maxim was somehow to be a universal law. So the individual maxim then gets replaced by a universal law statement, which takes this form. All persons will do the action X in those conditions C. So for example, like in my case, I'm teaching a lecture, in, well, I'm holding a review session right now for philosophy at Cal State Fullerton. That's my current action. So what's my maxim? My maxim is I will hold class meetings at the scheduled dates and times that I'm appointed by my institution. That's my maxim. So what if that was a universal law? It would be this universal law. All professors will hold their class meetings at the dates and times that they're scheduled by their institution. If that was a universal law, I think that there'd be no issues with that. It would be not impossible, and it would not be undesirable. It would just mean that people follow through on their institutional obligations as appointed. So that's not a problem. So I've not done anything wrong by holding this lecture. But there are actions that fail this test and they don't pass the bar of the moral law. Okay, so consider this. I'm waiting in a long line and I'm getting impatient with the line, so I'm going to cut. At that time, my maxim is I will cut a line when the line is long. If this is a universal law, the law says all people shall cut lines when there's a long line. Now, is that possibly something that could be a universal law? Of course not, because there won't be a line if everybody cuts, because the line requires people to maintain their position in single file. If everyone's cutting, that doesn't happen. Also, does the cutter want 100% of people to cut like they're doing? No. They want most people to respect the rule that says you don't cut ahead of people, because otherwise everyone would cut them again, and there'd be no point to what they're doing. So it's not something that can be done by everybody, and that's why it's wrong. Another example that Kant mentions, say I want to request a loan from somebody with no intention to pay it back. So I say, here's my maxim. I will lie about repaying a loan when I want money. If that's the universal law, then it says all people shall lie when they request loans if they want money. Okay, well, if that was the universal law, then the rule would be to lie about repayment and not the exception. And if that was the rule, there would no longer be any lending, because the lenders would know that 100% of borrowing requests are defaulted upon because there's 100% of liars requesting the loans. So there would no longer even be the existence of loans and lending if everyone lied about repayment. And also in that case, the present example of lying would not succeed, because it would be immediately identified as one of the 100% of cases where there's a lie being told. So the liar actually relies on other people to tell the truth so that their lie will be assumed as truth itself. You understand? These are actions that are wrong because they are based on maxims that cannot be universal laws. If this question were chosen, you'd want to mention what these versions of the imperative are, and then give example and discussion. Now, the second one says, don't ever treat a human being as a means to an end. So let's ask quickly, what is an end and what are means in comparison to the end? Someone let me know that here in the chat. So what are means and what are ends? I guess best is to start with end, because means are kind of defined in terms of the ends. So what are ends in the philosophical or ethical sense of the word? Not like the end of the movie, like the the last part of it, but rather in our terminological sense, what is an end? Okay, Naaman, well, you've said, okay, I guess you're saying methods of attaining your goal, that's what a means is, but the goal itself is the end. Ends, well, no, that's not correct, Kobe. Sort of, it's the effect, but it's the intended outcome. So like I can say that there's water on my car, which is an effect of rain, but it's not like my goal was to have that water there. So you're not exactly identifying one key ingredient in it, which is that it's a goal. It's something that you are hoping that will result. Okay, so it's an end result that you're hoping will turn out to happen. So ends are just goals, and means are the things that you do to arrive at or to get there. So like, for example, right now you have a goal, which is to graduate college. Why else would you be in this class, right? So if you have a goal of graduating college, what means are you taking? Taking classes, enrolling in them, and trying to pass. Why do you want to graduate college? Well, that's a means to the end of getting a job, and so forth. Okay, so anyway then, going back to the Kant categorical imperative, it says that you're never supposed to treat human beings as though they're just tools that you're manipulating to get to the goals that you want. You're supposed to treat human beings like they are the goal themselves for the sake of which you act. Okay, so like if I took money to kill somebody like a hitman, then I'm treating the person's life as a means to my enrichment. And that's fundamentally wrong. A person, a human being, is ultimately deserving of respect and human dignity. So you're supposed to treat people as though they're a goal and not a thing to exploit, manipulate, or even destroy on the way towards getting your goals. If a person is raped, then the victim of rape has been used as a means to the attainment of the perverse sexual pleasure of the attacker. And that person didn't have an opportunity to choose to do this, because obviously the definition is that's a not consented to act. So whenever you do something with or to another person that uses them for some goal that you have, which they don't share with you, that is using someone as a means. So yeah, it is kind of like to exploit, manipulate. The precise wording of what it is to use someone as a means, according to Honora O'Neill, is when you involve someone in an interaction that they would not or could not consent to. So like in a case of theft, that's not permission to take the item by definition of theft. In the case where I lied to somebody to conceal the truth so that I can get away with doing something, they have not consented to being lied to, because if they knew they were being lied to, then the lie would not be effective. Okay, so 2 rules. Act on maxims that could be universal laws. And number 2, do not ever treat a person in a way that they would not themselves agree to if they had full information. Okay, so there you go, categorical imperative of Kant, both versions. In war, are soldiers technically a means? Well, Kant has all kinds of thoughts about criminal justice and retributivism. He actually believes that in the context of like law and order and stuff, a person can be punished with death, and that could be righteous and justified. So he's a big defender of capital punishment and the death penalty. So I figure that because he has said that, I don't know exactly all his precise doctrines of war, but I would think that he would assume that in war, a similar type of justification exists, because the perpetrators or attackers or enemies in war, I guess you could argue, commit acts that justifiably entail that their lives could be taken. So if he's okay with executing a capital criminal, then I think he has no problem with killing a person in war, since that person may represent an enemy force that's killing your side. He thinks that the only acceptable punishment for killing is death. So I guess in the case of war, where everyone's killing each other, it's moral and permitted by him. But that's a separate discussion. It's just kind of on the side, not anything I'm asking you to know about. Okay, so on Neil's account, I think I just said it though, Angel, didn't I? She says that you use someone as a mere means when you involve them in an interaction that they would not consent to. So she thinks, to simplify Kant a little bit, just make sure that you don't do anything to a person that they're not going to agree with. And if that's the case, then you're not doing anything immoral. The 2 versions of the categorical imperative, it's been argued that they're equivalent in a sense, because even though they look different, they lead to the same moral guidance in any case. So in other words, whenever you act on a bad maxim that could not be universalized, you're also somehow treating a person as a means. And whenever you treat a person as a means, you're acting according to a maxim that can't be a universal law. And sometimes it might be a little difficult to see how the 2 things connect. So that's why I think he gives us 2 of those principles, because sometimes one is easier to apply in a situation than the other. When you're dealing with other people and the interaction is not indirect, I think the concept of using someone as a means is the easier version to think about. But when the interaction with other people is less immediate, like you're taking a free ride on the subway, you might think about it in terms of universal laws. But even with the free rider is using people as a means as well. Who's he using as a means? All the people that pay into the system so that he can exploit their payment into the system by taking a ride for free without himself paying. So anyways, just so you know, there's a connection between the 2 versions. But let's keep going, guys. You have more questions, so we should try to get as many out there as we can. What's next for you? I'll just wait for your question in the chat, and then we'll go next to that one. Okay, so Naaman, you say 22. Right, so Nicholas Everett, that's the article that you're referencing. He wrote the paper, Theism in Modern Science. Okay, so in his paper, Theism in Modern Science, he says that the universe doesn't match what you would think it would be like if it was really something created by God. So why does he say this? What kind of features does he think the universe would have if it was the result of God making it for mankind's sake? And then how does he say that contradicts what we find through science, or what at least the science appears to say? So that's what the question 22 is about. The difference between what you think the universe would be like if God made it for us versus what science appears to say in the contemporary scientific consensus view. Yeah, we'll definitely do that too, Janice. But for the moment, let's ask, why is it that Mr. Everett thinks this physical universe doesn't appear to be the kind of universe that would have been created by God for mankind? Because if God made it just for mankind's sake, then we should expect that it would be like X, Y, and Z. Tell me, what are the features that he thinks the universe would exhibit in case it really was made by God? Kobe. Okay, so what you're doing is you're telling me about the things that science tells us that contradicts these assumptions. So, okay, Earth is not the center of the universe. Humans have not always existed. The universe is way bigger than it would make sense to make if it was just for humans, right? And there's just one more. It's kind of very similar to the other thing that you mentioned, that humans have not always existed. So he says, first of all, you would think that we would appear very early in the universe's history, because if the whole universe is created just for us humans, because we're the children of God, created in his image, right? So we're like the crown jewel of the creation, over and beyond and more special than animals and other stuff. If that's the case, then you'd expect us to appear very early in the universe's history. Yeah, that's correct, Kobe. Those are all correct, yeah. Well, when you say since the beginning, I don't know. He says that it would at least be early. And even in Genesis, I don't think it says that we're on the first day. Man was created within the first 7 days of creation in Genesis. And on the seventh day, God rested, according to the scripture. So, yeah, if God makes this universe for the special sake of humans particularly, then you'd think we would have appeared within the first few days and way back at the beginning. Also, you'd expect that we would appear not too much later after the other non-human animals, because what would be the point of putting them in there and then having us delayed for a long time, many, many billions of years? You'd expect us to also inhabit a central position, that we'd be in the middle of the whole universe, because if it's created just for the sake of mankind, then shouldn't everything revolve around us and we have a special position? And finally, he says, you would think that the universe would not be so huge and much larger than the Earth. What would be the point of all that space that we can't do anything with, that humans can't occupy, if the whole universe is just made for us? So, according to science, though, none of these things are true, all right? First of all, scientifically speaking, human beings have not at all arrived early in the course of the universe. We're way late on the planet Earth. Human beings, Homo sapiens, are something like 100,000 years old or whatever, in the current form that we are as mammal life forms. So we didn't appear early. We are way later than the other animals. It took, according to Darwin's theory of evolution, billions of years for life forms to specialize from like little single-celled, simple life forms to vertebrate, mammalian, and sophisticated, intelligent life like us. So we didn't appear early according to science. We did not appear soon after the animals. We're also not in the middle. We all know that since Galileo Copernicus used telescopes in the medieval period to prove that we're not in the middle even of our local solar system. And of course, the scale of the universe is well known at this point. We have like the Hubble telescope looking at objects billions of light years away. So anyway, since the universe is that big, it's not this kind of compact size that just matches the size. What Everett is arguing is that science and religion just don't go together, because religion says the world would be a certain way, but science is showing that it's not that way. And maybe then that means science is wrong or religion is wrong. I don't know. It's your decision. So that's 22. Gloria, you're asking about 27. The shopkeeper example of Kant. Okay, Kant said that the motive behind your action matters. Oh wait, sorry, no, you don't want 27? You said 23, okay. 23, the theory of utilitarianism. Okay, what is it? Yeah, what's the theory of utilitarianism? Someone just let me know, yeah, no problem. It's a theory of ethics. So what does it say is the right kind of action? What's your moral obligation according to that theory of ethics? You should always do what kind of stuff? Utilitarianism, John Stuart Mill. Act always in such a way, well, do right. Come on, Gloria, it's a little bit overly general. Obviously, they all say you're supposed to do right. The question is, what's the definition of doing right? Because it's not the same definition from Kant as it is from Mill. Mill says the right action is to act always so that you promote the greatest amount of overall happiness for the greatest number of people, correct? So it's all about the maximization of overall happiness. And you could say a few more things about it. You could say it's based on the greatest happiness principle, which claims that actions are right insofar as they promote happiness or pleasure. Actions are wrong insofar as they promote the reverse of happiness. Happiness is pleasure in the absence of pain. The reverse of happiness is pain in the absence of pleasure. He says that this theory is reasonable because happiness is the only thing that we pursue as an end and not as a means. And then you could, I guess, explain how the theory functions in certain cases. Like if there's a greater amount of happiness associated with one action as opposed to an alternative, then that would be the action that's your moral obligation to do. It's consequentialist. It says that the moral status of an action depends on the consequences that follow from it, namely the consequences as they bear on overall human happiness. So that's utilitarianism. Maximize overall happiness and pleasure for as many people as possible. Do that because happiness is the end that each of us pursues, and everything else is a means to it. And there you go. So, Kobe, did we go over the question of right after the theory of utilitarianism? You're talking about, wait. Happiness is the only thing we pursue as an end and not as a means? I'm not sure. You should give me maybe the number because it's a little ambiguous. There's multiple questions about utilitarianism. But you'll let me know. So Mia, you said number 10, I guess. Let's go back and see. Mill's claim that happiness. Yeah. So let me get to that. But I saw that Mia asked her question earlier in the stream. So number 10, and then we'll move on to that if we can. What is the argument from design by William Paley? So Paley, argument from design. It starts off with an example that he gives of a person finding a certain thing somewhere. So you'll let me know then, what is the example of Paley that starts off his presentation of the argument from design? Leo, before we ask another question, give me an answer. Huh? What is the argument from design? Yeah, watch in the forest. Okay, good. So watch sitting in the forest. What's the point? Not the sphere. No, Justin. Wrong. That's Richard Taylor. That's a cosmological argument. So let's keep these things different and separated under their different files. So William Paley gives the example of the watch in forest. Why? Why does he give the example? Just because he's like, that would be funny? Why does he say it? It has to have a maker because it's too complex. Right, it's too complex and it has a precise function of telling time. So he says there's nothing that could have happened through random events or chance that would have produced a watch. For a watch to happen, there has to be some kind of intelligent being that constructs the watch and puts the pieces together, because nothing that complex and functional could just fall into place through randomness. So if that's the way that a watch has to come about, through an act of an intelligent designer, what about other things that we see in nature that are also functional and complex? What does he compare the watch with? That's not made by man, but is found in nature. So let's complete the analogy. We say watch has to have a maker. Okay, explain that. And then there's the eye, right? Kobe. The eye is something that is natural, meaning it's not man-made, but it clearly does have a function, and it's very complex. It has the function of vision, which you're using them right now. And all the little components and parts, the biological configuration of the different elements of your eye, they have to be just so arranged in order for vision to exist. So with a watch, he says, everyone already knows the watch has a creator. Wouldn't it be really ridiculous to say something like maybe the watch happened randomly? So if that's the explanation of the watch, a similar explanation must be given with the eye and other such things that exhibit function and are complex within nature. And what could be the watchmaker, so to speak, of these natural things? It would have to be something that could design the works of nature, a supernatural creator, basically God. Okay, so the watch stands to the watchmaker as the eye stands to God, and as anything in the universe which has complexity and function stands to God. Okay? And he says nobody would think that the watch could possibly arrive through chance. Nobody would say, hey, I've never seen a watch made, so how do I know it's got a maker? No one would say that's a valid reason for denying that it had a maker. Nor would you deny that it had a maker if it was broken or if you don't know how it works. So sometimes in nature, you know, we have organisms or body parts, organs that fail or that are defective or that have congenital birth defects and stuff. But there's still such evident marks of complexity and function and design that it overwhelms any judgment that that thing didn't have a creator. Okay, so that would be all the stuff on the question of design argument. Leo, you say number 11, right? Isn't that the current topic? I guess I was kind of just now mentioning them briefly, but let's say it clearly maybe from you. What are certain factors about a watch that would not make you doubt that it had a maker? Or I don't know, not about a watch, but certain factors that would never really cause significant doubt about the knowledge that this watch must have a creator or a maker. Things that wouldn't throw off the thought that it had a maker. Like what? It has to have a maker, and that's obvious, and you would still know that even if blah, blah, blah. What are those things that I would say next? Okay, so even if you don't, well, Leo, how precisely it is made, it's rather that if you do not know how it is made, like how it functions, or if it has a flaw, or if you don't know how it works, all of those, or even if watch works, or even if you observe flaw in the mechanism or the working of the watch, those things do not cause doubt that the watch has a maker. Also, he says nobody would assume instead of it having a maker that it was due to the law of nature of metal or something. No one would think that natural laws and just random circumstances could generate this watch. So if you have not seen it made, if it has a flaw, if you don't know how it works, those things don't cause doubt about it being made by something intelligent. And an alternative hypothesis that it's just due to random circumstances and chance is not a viable reason to doubt it either. Okay, so what else? What's next? You can just say what you think is the next topic for us. Still got a good amount of time, so we're, I think, doing pretty well. Kobe, explain Mill's claim that happiness is the only thing that... Okay, but I thought we did that. Haven't we covered this? What is an end? What is an end? Okay, Janice, we'll get right to that. But Kobe, let's have your question out there first. What's an end? That's okay, but we can do it if it's not clear. I want to make sure it's clear. But yeah, maybe it hasn't been directly addressed. I mean, we talked about means and ends in the context of Kant, but an end is a goal. Means are the things that you do to arrive or to achieve goals, whatever they are. So what that statement is saying then, in other words, is the only thing that we are ever seeking as an end, our only goal, your only goal, is pleasure. That's all you want. Everything else in life is just a stepping stone towards that goal. Why do you want a degree? Why are you doing this? Why are you in this class? Well, it's because you're hoping that there's going to be some kind of benefit to you that will make you happy because you're doing it. So if you can get a degree, if you can pass a class and get a degree and then get a job and then get money, then you're going to be able to have all these happy experiences and a pleasant life, and you want the pleasure that comes from all that. That's what motivates you. That's what gets you out of bed. That's what all of us want, is happiness and pleasure, he's saying. So if everyone wants happiness, then that's the overall objective of every person's behavior, and everything else is desired as a means to that end. And why not make the promotion and the maximization of happiness the standpoint of ethics? Because he's like saying, it's already what you want. I'm not the one telling you you want pleasure. You know you want pleasure, and that's something that's clear. So if all of us are seeking it personally, the pursuit of personal happiness, like they say in Declaration of Independence, then happiness is good, and we want happiness, and so make more of it rather than less. That's all Mill thinks that he's saying, and he believes it's got a lot of common sense backing, because don't you want happiness? And isn't that the only thing that you want? That's what he's saying. Okay, so like you could, if this question were chosen, for example, you could go through like the architecture of your goals. Why am I taking this test? Because I want to pass it, because I want to get a good grade, because I want to graduate, because I want to get a job, because I want money, or whatever. Or you might say, I just love taking tests, and that fills me with joy. It's still pleasure, though, in that case, even if you think of it as ultimately enjoyable without having to have any further justification. Okay, so that's all good. You say cosmological argument, Janice? Okay, so Taylor's cosmological argument, it's not exactly Taylor's, and he's commenting on it in the current day, but it's an ancient argument, thousands of years old. But let's talk about Taylor's presentation of it. What's the first example Richard Taylor gives in his cosmological argument essay? He says, hey, suppose that someone was walking around and they saw such a thing as blah, what? Richard Taylor, cosmological argument. Let's get the review of this. Sphere in the woods, yes. So you see a sphere in the woods, and what does he say would be the hot take reaction that anyone would have? Because it's weird, okay? It's a weird thing to see in the woods. So a person would probably be like thinking something along the lines of what? Because that's what sets off his whole argument. He's like, he goes from there. So he says, suppose you saw such a thing like a sphere in the woods, highly unusual. Immediate reaction would be, how did it get there? Why is that there? What is the thing that caused it to be here? Okay? So this point that there has to be an explanation for the sphere is then noted as a basic example of how the principle of sufficient reason is intuitive to all of us. You know already that if you see something strange like that, it has to have an ultimate origin, even if you're not clearly aware of what it is. And then he says that I start with this awkward, weird example because it's only really weird stuff that you stop for a moment and say how to get there. But you could ask the same type of question about anything, even everyday things that are around you at any time. Like this can of LaCroix, I mean, it's on this desk. How did it get there? Well, it came out of the fridge, and it came from the fridge from like the store where I bought it, and it was shipped from that store. And then we could go back and think about where it ultimately arrived from. But it had to come from somewhere, is the point. Whether it's a can of soda or, you know, a sphere in the woods. So this is the, therefore, example that illustrates the principle of sufficient reason. The principle says that in the case of anything true, there's a cause for it. The next step of the argument after we illustrate that principle via the sphere is that there are two types of truths. Now, what are these two types of truths? Mentioned by the author there in the article. I think some of the discussion of it is on like page 26 in the book, but anyway, my question just off your memory. What are two types of truths? Contingent, yes. And good, Kobe. Those are true things, but they could have been false. And then necessary truths, true things that could never be false. So I'm wearing like a red flannel type shirt, and it's contingent that I'm wearing this. It's not necessary that I'm wearing this. It's true that I am, but there's like 100 other items I could have picked instead. I just chose this randomly. So I'm wearing it, but I didn't have to wear it. So it's contingent. It's contingent on my decision process. Necessary truths, though, are different. That's like 2 + 2 is 4. 2 + 2 is 4 is not like the outfit I'm wearing today, because it's not like it takes a day off sometimes, and sometimes, depending on the weather or what the conditions are, it's not 2 + 2 is 4, it's something else. No, that's a logical mathematical truth, so that's a necessary truth. It has no ability to be false under any conditions. So contingent truths could be true or false depending on the conditions. Necessary truths have to be true all the time no matter what. Now, the contingent truths, the principle of sufficient reason says they have to have a cause because they depend on something to cause them. Next thing is that this whole universe is contingent. The fact that the universe exists is contingent, meaning that it seems possible to imagine never having existed in the first place. So if it's contingent, then just like my choice to wear this flannel, there has to be something that can explain why it happened. So what could be the cause, in other words, of this big universe? And there we're getting close to the end of the argument, because he says it can't cause itself, because nothing can cause itself if it's contingent. You know, like a person can't give birth to themselves, a cake cannot bake itself. Something has to bring it into the picture that's not the same thing as it. So contingent things cannot cause themselves, clearly. But also he says the universe cannot be caused by something that's contingent. Because why not? Tell me that. How come the cause of the universe can't just be something else that's contingent too? Why couldn't the cause of the universe just be another contingent thing? Because, yeah, that would lead to an infinite regress. And just to say it clearly, an infinite regress is thought of as something that is impossible and can't happen. So if an infinite regress is impossible, then the cause of the universe has to be something that is not contingent and instead something that's necessary. Because whatever is contingent can't be the first event or thing. Anything that is contingent comes from something else, like I just said. So if the cause of the universe was contingent, then that would just get us back to square one. Well, what's the cause of it? And that would go on to infinity unless something can start the whole sequence. And whatever is the first thing in the sequence must not be something that's conditioned on anything before it. So that's why he says the first cause of all things is God, and that's a necessary being that has to exist and could not possibly not exist. So everything except for God is contingent, and it all depends, in the first instance, on the necessary being getting it started. Okay, so there you go. That's the cosmological argument and all the major points within it. So we still have a good, 15 or so minutes, 16 minutes. Let's see what you want in terms of the next question topic. So why did Mr. Peter Singer say that the problem of global hunger is not a problem of the scarcity of resources? That's correct. He does say that. Why, though? Tell me if you can. Singer doesn't agree that there could never be enough food for everybody. That's what he's objecting to there. Some people say there's a problem of hunger, sure, but it's a problem of not having enough food, scarcity of resources. And if that's true, then we should give up trying to fix the problem, because if you have too many people and not enough resources, inevitably there's nothing that you can do to solve the needs for those people. But Singer says, I don't agree. We could have enough resources. It's the distribution, one, poor distribution, and also waste, correct. Now, in what way does he say the Western culture or diet is inefficient in the usage of consumable resources? Do you remember what he said about this? Like, how is it that we end up wasting so much food? In what way do we allow such inefficiency or promote it through our behavior individually, collectively? How is that? There's a key point. There's meat. Yeah. So he talks about meat. He talks about animal agriculture, and he says that the meat-based diet and the animal agriculture that's a staple of our, Western lifestyle produces a lot of inefficiency and waste, because we have to divert so many consumable resources to the production of livestock, cattle, chickens, etc., pigs. And the amount of consumable resources that we divert to them could more efficiently be used to feed actual human beings directly. And if we did that, there would be so much additional consumable resources that we could feed a global population of an even larger size than we have now. So he says that as one point. Because of how much meat we eat, we actually waste a ton of food, and that could be used to help feed more people. He also says that there's a lot of waste just in the sense of how much food we throw away, literally, like buying food, tossing it in the trash, letting it go to the landfill, not eating everything. So if we were a little bit more frugal and moderate in our consumption habits, and if we de-emphasize the role of meat and animal agriculture, he thinks those are two sources of efficiency that we waste. And so he doesn't want us to think it's a lost cause situation and no one can do anything about it. He believes there are choices individuals and societies make that produce these disparities. So that's his argument anyway. Whether it's true or false, that's what he said. So you can let me know if you have what's next. Just anytime, you got it, and I'll be ready. Make good use of the time. If you have questions, you should try your best to throw them out there at me. Okay, so Kevin, you say 31. Let me take a look at 31. Okay, so what 31 asks is this. It says, describe an action that is morally obligatory according to one ethical theory and morally impermissible according to another. So the first thing let's do is just set the stage. What are two ethical theories that we studied? Just if you can name them. Two ethical theories, for sure, that we all studied. Let's just go with that first. And then we'll move on to the next point in this question. Because that's fundamental. The question says, give one action that the two theories disagree about. So let's be clear what the two theories are that are the points of disagreement here. You've got this ethical system versus the other, and those two are what? I know what, it's a big word, maybe hard to spell, but don't hesitate. Because I have no idea. I mean, if you don't tell me, I don't know. What, two ethical theories? Drawing blanks, tell me what they are. Because I'll never say it. I'll never say it until you put it in the chat. Yeah, Leo, not the question though. I'm asking you the name of two ethical theories. you're looking at a different part of the question. It says, name an action that's obligatory to one theory and impermissible to another. No, Jerry. Theory fit for swine is an objection against the moral theory of blank, but you're still not naming. Yes, that's right, Justin. Utilitarianism versus Kantianism. Come on, guys. Fundamental. Utilitarian ethics. Who's the author? John Stuart Mill. Lived from 1806 to 1873. Kantian ethics. Immanuel Kant, the German author, 1724 to 1804. Big topics. Big topics. Ethics was like one of the whole units in the class, so you have to know those. Okay, two ethical theories. Now give me an example of one action that these two theories would disagree about, because one of them would say that's something that you should do, and the other one would say that is something that you should never do. So you have to give one action that the two theories diverge about, where one of those two theories would say, based on its principles, that this is something obligatory, and the other would say it's something forbidden. Okay, Kobe, that's a good example. The transplant scenario would work. So in utilitarian theory, it would be morally even obligatory, perhaps, because it's saving more lives through the act of killing one than not killing the one. But of course, that would be wrong in Kant's theory, because Kant says it's never okay to use a human being as a means. So if you kill like a homeless person and take all their organs out and then give them to 5 transplant donors, or not donors, but transplant recipients, right? Then you've murdered a person and you've saved 5 lives, I guess, through the provision of the organs. That would be, in some version of utilitarianism, acceptable because it secures the greater number of survivors. But it's wrong, fundamentally wrong to Kantian theory, because it treats that person as a means to the end of the other people's safety and survival. You can also imagine cases where Kantian theory would say it's an obligation to do something, and the utilitarian theory would say it's impermissible. So like, for example, take a case where by lying, you're going to create a lot more happiness than telling the truth. Suppose that you're hiding somebody who's being chased down by an attacker. And then the attacker just sees you and they're like, answer me honestly, are you hiding the person in your house? Now, if you tell them the truth, they'll go in there and kill him, which is bad, right? If you lie and say, hey, I haven't seen him, I don't know where they are, sorry, I can't help you, you're lying, that's not truthful, but you're doing it to save someone's life. Now, to Kant, it's never okay to lie, because you cannot universalize the maxim which says, I will deceive somebody in order to promote the best interests. Because if that's the universal law, then lying becomes the rule instead of the exception. And then lying itself would not even succeed, because it would be assumed as lies instead of as truth. So in this case that I'm giving you, where you're being asked whether you're giving safe harbor to someone that's being persecuted by an attacker, the Kantian ethics would say you're obligated to tell the truth. Forget the consequences, it's just the moral law to tell the truth. But Mill and utilitarians would say it's fundamentally immoral to tell the truth here, because the consequences of truth are way worse for human happiness than lie. So, I mean, you can give a case where an action generates a lot of utility, but it treats someone as a means, and that would be something obligatory to the utilitarian, but impermissible to the Kantian. Or you could give an act that is considered obligatory to Kant's moral system, like telling the truth no matter what, as opposed to how in a utilitarian theory, that same act of truth-telling could be non-optimific. It could not lead to the best overall human happiness. Okay, so that question is asking you to select of your own creative free play one action, whatever action. Some of these we mentioned would work, or if you can think of others. But the one action, the thing is, it just has to be evaluated differently by the two ethical theories, such that one says it's wrong and the other one says it's right. Okay? So good. What else then? If we go to another question, we're getting a little low on time, so maybe we have time for like 1, maybe maximum 2 more. But whatever you think you want to go through, I'm right here and I'll try to help. How many questions will be on the midterm? There's going to be, I think, about 11, and I'm going to have you answer 7 or something. So like 7 out of 11, something along those lines. Jerry, you say 39. Okay. Tragedy of the Commons from Garrett Hardin. Garrett Hardin says we have no obligation to assist the third world global poor. Yeah, so Celine, here's how you will be taking the exam. I've mentioned it in a previous meeting. You will just receive the exam form as a titanium announcement just before 10 a.m. on Monday. Or sorry, not Monday, Tuesday. We have Tuesday, Thursday, thank you. So Tuesday morning, next class, We don't have any class meeting. There's no YouTube Live. There's no Zoom. There's nothing where we interact except I'm sending you the test form, and you're going to receive it as an announcement at just prior to 10 a.m. Then you have until 11:15 a.m., the end of the class period, to return back your answers to me in an attached file that you send to my email account. So that's it. You just receive the test at 10 a.m. on Tuesday, and you have 75 minutes until the end of class time to send back your answers to me. The test form is just going to contain 11 selected questions off of that list, and then it will direct you to answer 7 out of those 11, whichever 7 you want. So that's how the test will be, and that's it. Does that answer your question, Celine? I want to make sure that's clear, but so it's a good question. Just making sure it's clear. But if you have any further ambiguity or question about it, you can follow up. Okay, thanks. So Jerry, about 39. The tragedy of the commons. So Hardin says we have no obligation to assist the third world global poor. Part of his reasoning is that he states this principle called the, will that be written anywhere, Sebastian? Yeah, I'll send you a message through Titanium that'll just notify you about those things. But it's in a way very straightforward. On the day of the test, you take the test at class time. You receive the document and you send it back. And it's very straightforward. I mean, I'm not asking you to do proctorio. I'm not putting you on Zoom. I'm not having you have a camera facing you or anything. So you just take a test during a certain window of time. You obviously have to receive the test from me. So all you got to do is be ready to receive my test at 10 a.m. Be ready and prepared to take a test at 10 a.m. on Tuesday, just like any class where you have an exam on a certain day of class. The tragedy of the commons. Mr. Garrett Hardin says that certain things always fail, and it's inevitable. Which things and why? What does he say there? These things always fail due to 2 factors. But I'm just asking if you could review your notes and tell me what you think that answer is. Garrett Hardin, tragedy of the commons. A certain type of thing always fails. What is it? See, this is when it pays to keep those clear notes. You want to take good notes throughout the whole semester because it always matters. Everything matters. Everything counts. So I know the lectures are fun, interesting, engaging, but you have to have your notes. Okay, when a commodity is shared, giving personal access, some will use more than their allotted share. Okay, correct, sort of, but it sounds like a statement that's derived from something off Google or whatever. So, but it's along the right lines. So with the tragedy of the commons, he says public resources inevitably fail because they will be overused and poorly maintained. Everyone will want to have access to them, and so they'll be quickly overutilized, and no one will have any matching feeling of responsibility towards the sustainability and the upkeep of the resource. So everyone will use it, no one will take care of it, and therefore it'll get destroyed and ruined. Unlike private resources, he says that with private resources, the private owner doesn't want their invested resource to be ruined because then they would lose the value of their own investment. So he gives an example of 1 acre of farmland. He says, take a case where we make the 1 acre of farmland open to the public. If we open the farmland to the public, then everyone will bring their animals. And so there will be too many animals for it to support, and it will get overgrazed. Additionally, those people from the commons that just use it because it's publicly available will not do anything to take care of it, clean up after themselves, or manage it. So once it's open to the public, too many use it, no one takes care of it, and now the 1 acre can't be used by anyone because it's overgrazed. If the 1 acre was privately owned, then the private owner would not allow it to have more animals than it could support because they don't want to destroy the resource they've spent money on. And so when people own things privately, they manage them well and they don't overuse them. So that's why he thinks public resources always fail, and he's warning against the support for any such public resources. In particular, he's highlighting his opposition to the World Food Bank because he thinks that the World Food Bank is kind of another commons that's doomed to fail for the same reasons. International supply of food that poor nations can draw from, supplied by the wealthier nations, But in this case, again, he says all the poor nations will draw from it without limitation, not moderating the reproductive rates that they have in the third world, and therefore making the problem just bigger without addressing the root causes of poverty or hunger for a future generation to deal with. So that was his argument. He gave the example of the 1 acre, and he's kind of making an attack on the World Food Bank in the bigger picture. How long the answers should be? I think you should try to have the most thorough and accurate answers that you can. Don't be brief. Don't try to write one sentence or something. You should write paragraphs, 1 or 2, to answer most of these questions. So a lot of times students think, what's the minimum? Try to think of doing the maximum instead of the minimum, because you know these questions are scored on a 0 through 4 point scale. So you don't want to just say, well, did I get it or not? Is it all or nothing? It's graded on a scale, so there could be partial credit depending on how accurate, how clear, how detailed it is. So you want to be fully clear and fully accurate, blow it out of the water, say everything about the question that you can that's true, and leave no information behind. So a fully perfect answer that gets a 4 has said everything that the author said about it in a way that's accurate to their original writing, and they didn't leave anything out. You can have an answer that's fully complete but inaccurate. It touches on all their points, but it misrepresents them. Or you can have an answer that's fully accurate but incomplete, like it correctly expresses what they've said, but there's information missing. So in the best case scenario, you're maxing out both. It's fully complete, no information is missing. It's also totally accurate, meaning that it's an accurate reflection of what the author's ideas were. So that's it. All the information's in the book. You have the full study guide. So I guess now we're good to go. This has been our review session. What are you asking, Kobe? Are we going to have the full what? Yes, you have the full time that you have for class to take this test, 75 minutes. So the window of time is from 10 to 11:15. And I'll probably even send the test form 5 or even 10 minutes or so before class. So there will be a little additional time, maybe about 1 hour and 20 minutes, 80 minutes. So it's plenty of time, but take your time. Don't rush through the answers. And you can prepare your sample responses because you already have access to the study guide. Sometimes a professor will give you a study guide and say, here are the sort of topics that we'll talk about, but these are the actual questions. So that's definitely something that'll help you. As long as you're willing to go back and research and review your notes and the lectures, you can certainly find the information. It's all there. Okay then, guys, so have a great one. Thanks so much. I'll be replying to other email requests that I may have received on grades and stuff for the first essay, so not to worry, and I'll be in touch with you today and in the coming days. All right, thanks again, everyone. Have a great one. I'll be in touch with you over the weekend to remind you about the parameters for the midterm on Tuesday. For now, though, have a good one, and I guess I'll see you soon. Okay, bye-bye.